There is a stain on a wall in this castle. For 400 years, visitors have been led to a small wood-paneled room, shown a dark mark near the stove, and told the same story, that a hunted monk, alone here one night, saw the devil in the shadows and hurled his inkpot at him. Everyone who runs this place knows the story is a lie. There is no inkpot, there never was a devil in the corner. And every few decades, when the mark on the wall begins to fade, someone quietly mixes fresh ink and paints it back. Hold on to that. A castle that renews a fake stain, on purpose, for centuries, because a true fact would be less useful than a good story. Because the man that room belongs to was real. And in the year he lived here, he was, by the command of the Holy Roman Emperor, a dead man. Anyone in the empire could kill him on sight and answer for nothing. So one spring evening, he was seized on a forest road by armed men, dragged from his wagon, and made to vanish. He would spend the next 10 months in this fortress under a false name, growing out his hair and beard, calling himself a knight. And in a burst of 11 weeks, in a language he built to be understood from the mountains to the sea, he would translate a book that reshaped how an entire people speaks. To this day. The stain is a lie, the man was Martin Luther, and this is the most mythologized castle in Germany. This is the Wartburg. To understand why a castle would lie about its own past, start with how it lies about its birth. The Wartburg crowns a narrow sandstone ridge above the town of Eisenach in Thuringia, in the wooded heart of Germany. The story it tells about its founding is beautiful. They say that in the year 1067, a count named Ludwig the Jumper stood on this ridge, looked at the bare rock and cried out, "Wait, mountain, you shall become a castle for me." And because the ridge was not truly his land, they say he had loyal knights carry baskets of Thuringian soil up the slope so he could swear on his own ground that the hill was his. Almost none of that is true. The tale comes from a late and unreliable chronicle and was made famous only in 1835 by a book of Wartburg legends. The iron oath swords supposedly dug up in 1845 to prove the story are now known to be a 19th century fabrication. Props for a legend forged 700 years too late. The documented castle is quieter and older only in stone. The Wartburg first appears in a real record in the year 1080 as a base in a Saxon war, and what actually survives from its great age is extraordinary. In the middle of the 12th century, a landgrave called Ludwig the Iron, who married a sister of the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, raised a great residential hall here. Its oak timbers have been dated, ring by ring, to the winter of 1157. That hall, the Palace, still stands. Its long arcaded front, tier on tier of rounded arches, is one of the best preserved secular buildings of its century anywhere north of the Alps. So the pattern is set from the very first stone. A real, remarkable castle, and laid over it, a legend the castle liked better than the truth. It would spend the next 9 centuries doing exactly that, again and again. The next layer is music, and the castle's second great invention. Around the year 1200, under a landgrave named Hermann, the Wartburg became one of the most brilliant courts in the empire. The greatest German poet of the age, Walter von der Vogelweide, sang in this hall. Wolfram von Eschenbach dedicated part of his vast romance of the Grail, Parsifal, to the castle's lord. For a generation, this ridge was where German poetry was made. And out of that real brilliance, the castle grew a legend to match it. They tell of a great contest of minstrels held here around 1206, the Sängerkrieg, the Singers' War, in which the finest poets of the land duelled with verse for their lives, the loser to be handed to the executioner. It is a wonderful story. It is also a piece of 13th century fiction. No such contest is recorded as an event. Scholars are blunt about it. The Singers' War never happened. But it happened to the castle. 600 years later, a painter would cover an entire wall of the Wartburg with the scene in glowing color. Richard Wagner would build an opera on it, Tannhäuser, and carry the Wartburg's name to every stage in Europe. A contest that never took place became one of the most famous things about the castle where it never took place. By now, you should be noticing the pattern. The Wartburg does not simply keep its history, it improves it. The third layer is a real person, a saint, and it shows you the machine working in slow motion across 7 centuries. Her name was Elizabeth, a daughter of the King of Hungary. She was brought to the Wartburg in 1211 as a small child, 4 years old, betrothed to the Landgrave's son. She married him here, bore a child here, and then in 1227, her young husband died of fever on his way to a crusade. Elizabeth left the castle, gave herself to the care of the poor under a confessor of ferocious severity, and died at Marburg in 1231. She was 24. 4 years later, Rome made her a saint. That much is history. What the castle did with her afterward is the lesson. The single most famous story about Elizabeth, that she was carrying bread hidden in her cloak to feed the poor, and when her husband demanded to see it, the bread had turned to roses, is not in the earliest accounts of her life. It grew onto her over the medieval centuries, a miracle assembled by later hands. And in the 1850s, a painter fixed that legend forever, in a fresco on the Wartburg's own walls, in the exact form millions of visitors now carry in their heads. Then a German emperor went further still. Between 1902 and 1906, Kaiser Wilhelm II had Elizabeth's chamber sheathed in more than 1 million pieces of glass and gold, a shimmering Byzantine shrine wrapped around a bare Romanesque room. The saint a visitor meets today is real history, seen through 2 romantic retellings stacked one on the other. A true woman, a miracle that was added, a halo of gold laid on centuries late, which is precisely the pattern the castle's most famous chapter repeats, the one you came for. In April of 1521, in the city of Worms, a monk stood in front of the Holy Roman Emperor and the assembled power of the German nation and refused to take back a word he had written. For that, the emperor placed him under the imperial ban. In plain terms, Martin Luther was now an outlaw. It was legal, encouraged, for any subject of the empire to seize him or kill him. To shelter him was a crime. He left Worms a walking dead man. His own prince did not intend to let him die. Frederick the Wise, the Elector of Saxony, arranged a kidnapping, a rescue disguised as a crime. On the evening of the 4th of May 1521, on a lonely road near the forest, masked horsemen ambushed Luther's wagon, pulled him down, set him on a horse, and rode through the night. His companions thought he had been taken by enemies. That was the point. Where Luther had gone, no assassin could follow because no one knew. Where he had gone was here. Up the ridge, through the gate, into the Wartburg, and into a new life. He put off his monk's habit. He let his tonsure and beard grow out. He took a knight's clothes and a knight's name. Junker Jörg, the squire George. He hunted with the garrison. He learned to wear a sword. For 10 months, the most wanted man in Europe hid in plain sight as a minor nobleman, and it worked. It was not a prison cell, whatever the paintings suggest. The castle's own researchers have shown he had a small suite of rooms, a study, a bedchamber, a passage between them, a working apartment with space to think. And it was in that space, cut off from the world, that he called the fortress his Patmos, after the island where an exiled apostle once wrote the book of Revelation, a prison and a place of vision at once. Then he did the thing that made this castle immortal. Beginning in the middle of December 1521, working from the Greek New Testament that the scholar Erasmus had printed 2 years before, Luther translated the entire New Testament into German. He finished the draft in about 11 weeks. Not word for word, that was the genius of it. He translated it into a living German, a speech deliberately pitched to be understood everywhere, from the Rhine to Saxony, by a mother in her house and a merchant on the road. He went to the markets to hear how ordinary people actually spoke, and he wrote it down. When it was printed in September 1522, it sold out within weeks. Then it did something no book had done before. Because it was read aloud in every corner of the German lands. In the same words, Luther's German began to pull 1,000 dialects toward a single center. the way Germans write, and to a real degree the way they speak, bends still around choices a hunted man made in a small room in this castle over one winter. It is one of the most consequential things ever done inside a castle wall. And the man himself did not stay to enjoy it. In March 1522, against his prince's explicit wishes, Luther walked back out of the safe fortress and toward the danger to steady a Reformation running wild without him. When Frederick the Wise begged him not to come, warned that he could not guarantee his safety, Luther wrote back a letter of astonishing nerve.
I come to Wittenberg under a far higher protection than the electors. I have not the slightest intention of asking your Highness's help. I consider that I am more able to protect your grace than you are to protect me.
He rode out of the Wartburg on the 6th of March. He left behind an empty apartment, a finished manuscript, and in time a wall with a stain on it that he never made, telling a story he never lived, about a night that never happened. The legend of the inkpot came later, after his death, first told the other way around, with the devil throwing the ink at Luther, and only generations on flipped into the hero we know, hurling it back. It grew, people think, out of Luther's own idea that a man fights the devil with ink, meaning with scripture, with writing. The castle heard the metaphor and painted it onto the wall as fact. Of course it did. That is what this castle is for. For nearly 300 years after Luther, the Wartburg slowly fell into a beautiful ruin. Then the age of the Romantics found it and gave it its most dangerous life. In 1777, the poet Goethe climbed to the decaying castle, stayed for weeks, sketched its ruins, and called it Luther's Patmos. He wanted it saved. But the moment that changed everything came on the 18th of October, 1817. About 500 students from universities across the German lands climbed this ridge for a festival, and it became the founding rally of German liberal nationalism. The date was chosen with terrible care. It fused two anniversaries, 4 years since a great battle had driven Napoleon out of Germany, and 300 years since Luther had launched the Reformation. Faith and fatherland welded into one. The students carried a banner in black, red, and gold, colors that would one day become the flag of Germany itself. That night, on a hill below the castle, they lit a bonfire and threw books into it, bundles labeled with the titles of works they hated. And here the Wartburg's habit of making history unforgettable turns dark. Among the titles burned that night, one was thrown into the flames to anti-Semitic chants. It was a small, ugly moment inside an idealistic one. And it was not forgotten. More than a century later, when the Nazis staged their own book burnings in 1933, they pointed back to the Wartburg Festival as their model. The same ridge that sheltered the man who freed a conscience also lit the first of the fires that history would learn to fear. The Wartburg does not only make heroes, it makes symbols, and a symbol will serve whoever picks it up. Which brings us, at last, to the men who built the castle you would actually visit today. Because most of what you would photograph on the Wartburg is not medieval at all. It is the work of the 19th century, pretending, brilliantly, to be the 12th. From 1838, a Thuringian prince named Karl Alexander set out to rebuild the Wartburg as a national monument, a stone argument about who Germans were. His architect, Hugo von Rittgen, left more than 1,100 drawings of how he thought the castle should have looked. Rittgen restored the old hall and crowned it with a grand ceremonial chamber. And the tall keep that dominates every photograph of the Wartburg, the tower everyone believes is 1,000 years old, Rittgen built it new from the ground up between 1853 and 1859 and set a gilded cross on top. The most photographed part of the castle is the most modern. The genius of the rebuild is in the seam you cannot find. Run your eye along the carved stone capitals of the old arcade. About a third are weathered Romanesque originals, and the rest are crisp copies. Cut in the 1850s to match, the join deliberately softened until you cannot tell which century is speaking. They quarried the same pale sandstone the medieval masons had used, so that new and old would even weather alike. This was not fraud, it was a philosophy that the most persuasive past is the one whose repairs are invisible. And the loop closed on itself. Wagner had already turned the Wartburg into opera. Then a dreaming young king in Bavaria, Ludwig II, fell in love with these remade halls and copied them into the fantasy castle he raised on a crag above his own kingdom. Neuschwanstein, a real castle, reinvented as an idea and then copied back into stone as a brand new castle pretending to be old. The Wartburg taught Germany how to do that. It was the first and the most complete. So, is the Wartburg real? Or is it a fake? The honest answer is that it is the wrong question. The Wartburg is not a fraud, and it is not quite a relic. It is a machine for making memory visible, a building that has been telling Germans who they are for 900 years, and has done it by absorbing every age that used it. The count who never jumped, the singers who never sang, the saint and her added miracle, the outlaw who really did remake a language, and the inkpot he never threw, the students on the hill, the prince who wove the whole thing into one seamless argument in stone. The most honest witness to all of this was the painter who covered its walls with legend. When his patron worried that painting St. Elizabeth with a golden halo might be too Catholic and that the old ink stain in Luther's room was an embarrassing fiction, Moritz von Schwind refused to give up either one.
To paint St. Elizabeth without her halo would have made the whole work impossible for me. I would protest in just the same way against the abolition of the ink stain in the Luther room.
He understood the castle perfectly. The halo and the stain are the same thing, necessary fictions, in a building whose entire job is to make the past you can feel out of the past that merely happened. That is why they keep repainting the mark on the wall. Not because they think you'll believe it, because the Wartburg has never asked you to sort the true from the false. It asks something harder and better. Learn to hear which century is speaking, and understand that the fusion of all of them, saint and outlaw, ruin and reinvention, ink stain and gilded halo, is precisely the thing the Wartburg was built and rebuilt to be. A castle that told the truth about a lie, and a monk who came here a dead man and left with a language in his hands. If you want the whole of it, the documented castle under the legends, the full story of Luther's 10 months as Junker Jörg, and every source behind this episode, there is a complete written guide on our website, linked at the top of the description. If you go yourself, the town of Eisenach sits on the fast rail line through central Germany. Take the old signposted Luther footpath up from the market square rather than the road, and you climb to the gate the way the pilgrims did. And if you want to see what the Wartburg traded away when it agreed to become a monument, look next at Eltz Castle, a great German castle that came through the centuries almost untouched and never had to reinvent itself at all. And if castles with stories like this one are your kind of history, subscribe. The StoneKeep Atlas archive already holds 100 of them, from the Rhine to the Loire, with more episodes on the way.